Marcus sat on the cracked sidewalk with his back against a cold brick wall, holding a piece of cardboard that read in faded black marker, "Can I fix it for food?" The words were short, but behind them was a lifetime of struggle, and yet no one cared to know. People passed him as if he were invisible, their eyes darting away, pretending he did not exist. Some chuckled under their breath, mocking the sign as if it were a joke. A group of teenagers once stopped, pointed at him, and laughed, "Fix it. He can't even fix his own life." Marcus heard every word but said nothing. He just lowered his head and kept holding the sign, because deep inside he knew his hands still remembered what his mind refused to forget. He was no ordinary man begging for coins. Once, he had been Marcus Reed, a name once chanted in stadiums, a racing legend whose photographs filled magazines, whose trophies gleamed in glass cases, and whose name carried the weight of speed and glory. But time had been cruel. An accident had stolen his career, betrayal had stolen his savings, and grief had stolen his will to start again. Now, years later, he was only a shadow in torn clothes, sitting on a corner where engines roared past. Every sound of a car making his chest tighten with memories of tracks, races, and victories. He kept telling himself that he still had purpose, that his hands, though dirty and bruised, could still turn a wrench, still breathe life into a dead engine. But no one wanted to believe a homeless man could know anything about cars. Day after day, he offered the same words, "I can fix it for food," yet all he received were doubtful stares and cruel laughs. One afternoon, as the sky darkened with heavy clouds, a sleek sports car rolled to a stop in the middle of the street, steam rising from the hood. The driver, a young man in an expensive suit, stepped out with frustration written on his face, kicking the tire as if it were the car's fault. People at a nearby cafe turned to watch, sipping their drinks with a kind of amused curiosity. Marcus stood slowly, his old knees aching, and walked toward the stranded car, clutching his sign tightly. The crowd's eyes followed him, some already, whispering, mocking him before he even spoke. Marcus approached the driver with quiet respect and said in a calm voice, "Sir, I can fix it for food." The driver turned, eyes scanning him from head to toe, taking in the ragged clothes, the unshaven face, the sign that looked almost pitiful. A smirk tugged at his lips as he said, "You fix this, don't make me laugh." The crowd chuckled, shaking their heads, waiting for Marcus to retreat in shame. But Marcus did not move back. He kept his eyes steady and repeated softly, "I can fix it for food." There was something in his tone, a firmness, not arrogance, but certainty, as if his words carried truth that no one else could hear. The driver, half amused and half irritated, finally shrugged. "All right, old man, go ahead, show us what you've got. But if you mess it up, don't blame me when they laugh at you even harder." The cafe crowd leaned closer, whispers filling the air, some pulling out their phones to record what they thought would be a joke. Marcus stepped forward, his hands trembling not from doubt but from hunger, exhaustion, and the weight of 1,000 eyes. He placed the sign gently on the sidewalk and rolled up the sleeves of his worn-out jacket. His fingers brushed the hood of the car, and for a moment it was as if he had returned to the racing pit, surrounded by mechanics and roaring engines. His heart raced, but his mind sharpened. He opened the hood, peered inside, and in seconds, he spotted the problem. His hands moved with precision, tightening here, adjusting there, his touch both delicate and firm. The crowd grew quieter, their laughter fading as they watched his steady movements. The driver, arms crossed, tried to hide his growing unease, as he realized this man was not fumbling like a clueless beggar but working with the confidence of someone who belonged in a garage, maybe even a racetrack. Minutes passed, though to Marcus, it felt like stepping back into the life he had lost. Sweat ran down his forehead, but his focus never wavered. Finally, he closed the hood, stepped back, and said simply, "Try it now." The driver hesitated, glancing at the crowd, then slid into the car and turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared back to life with a power that made heads turn. Gasps spread through the onlookers, their mocking expressions melting into surprise. Then silence. Marcus stood there quietly, wiping his hands on his jacket, saying nothing, only watching as the driver's arrogance turned into disbelief. The young man stepped out, staring at Marcus as if he were seeing him for the first time. How did you?" he began, but his voice trailed off. Marcus didn't answer. He only picked up his sign, his eyes carrying a weight of untold stories. For the first time in years, the crowd no longer looked at him with laughter, but with questions, curiosity, and perhaps a trace of guilt. He had told them he could fix it for food. They hadn't believed him, but now, the city had just witnessed the first glimpse of the man Marcus Reed used to be. The engine's roar had silenced the crowd, yet their whispers lingered like shadows, as Marcus stood with his cardboard sign back in hand, his eyes calm but heavy with memories of tracks and trophies that no one here knew about, except perhaps one or two older faces in the crowd who looked at him with a strange spark of recognition, but said nothing. The young driver who had mocked him earlier now looked both unsettled and embarrassed. his pride bruised by the fact that a homeless man had fixed what he, with all his money, could not. Instead of offering food as promised, he tried to cover his unease with a laugh and said, "Well, you got lucky this time, old man. Don't expect people to believe you can actually do anything useful." His words were sharp, but they trembled at the edges, betraying a fear of being humiliated in front of the growing crowd. The cafe audience erupted with laughter again, though it was uneasy laughter, not as confident as before, like people forcing themselves to take sides even when doubt had started to creep into their minds. Marcus didn't argue, didn't defend himself. He simply lowered his eyes and said, "Luck has nothing to do with it." His voice carried a quiet strength that unsettled even those who had come only to mock. The driver, determined to regain control of the scene, smirked and called out to the people watching, "Who wants to test this so-called mechanic? Maybe we should see if he can handle something real, not just a simple stall." The laughter swelled, crueler this time, echoing around Marcus like chains meant to bind him to the sidewalk where he had been dismissed for years. Another man stepped forward, his old pickup truck sputtering weakly in the parking lot, smoke rising from its tired engine. "Fix mine then, if you're so great," he said with a sneer, tossing Marcus a challenge as if throwing scraps to a beggar. The crowd leaned closer, eager for more entertainment, their phones raised to record every second of what they assumed would be a failure. Marcus walked to the truck slowly, his steps steady but his heart pounding, for though his hands knew engines, he also knew how easily crowds could turn from curiosity to cruelty, and how quickly hope could be crushed. He opened the hood, inhaling the familiar smell of oil and smoke, and as his fingers touched the engine, he felt the ghosts of his past the pit stops, the roars of approval, the split-second decisions that had once saved him victories. He moved, with the same rhythm, tightening bolts, adjusting wires, cleaning a clogged filter, each action fluid, as if rehearsed in another lifetime. The laughter grew quieter again, the crowd watching with wide eyes, trying to reconcile the man in torn clothes with the precision of someone who clearly knew machines better than anyone present. The driver of the truck, arms crossed and smirking, shouted, "Come on, hurry up, old man, or did your memory of fixing cars fade with your teeth?" The crowd laughed again, crueler this time, and Marcus felt the sting of humiliation wash over him, but he did not stop, because hunger gnawed at his stomach, and dignity demanded he finish what he had started. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, tension building with every small adjustment he made, until finally, he stepped back, his voice calm but certain as he said, "Try it now." The owner rolled his eyes but climbed into the seat, twisting the key with a mocking grin ready on his lips. The grin vanished instantly when the truck, which had barely sputtered before, came alive with a steady, powerful hum, as if awakened from a deep slumber. The crowd gasped, phones capturing the moment, whispers spreading like fire through dry grass. For the second time in one afternoon, Marcus had turned mockery into silence, and silence into awe. But before anyone could clap or cheer, the young man with the sports car raised his voice again, desperate to reclaim attention. "Don't be fooled," he shouted. "Even broken clocks are right twice a day. He can't really know what he's doing, he's just lucky twice." His words rang hollow, but the laughter picked up again, fueled more by people's fear of being wrong than by real belief. The cruel sound pressed against Marcus's chest like a weight, but he lifted his chin, eyes steady, and said, "Luck doesn't fix engines. Skill does, and skill doesn't disappear because life gets hard." The crowd went quiet again, some looking at him with shame, others with curiosity, and a few with stubborn disbelief. One older man stepped closer, narrowing his eyes as if studying Marcus's face for a memory. "I know you," he whispered, his voice almost lost in the murmur of the crowd. Marcus turned toward him but said nothing, the name of his past still hidden like a secret too heavy to release. The man's whisper grew louder. "You're Marcus Reed, aren't you, the racer?" The one who his voice broke, the words hanging in the air like sparks about to ignite a fire. The crowd shifted, whispers turning into a wave of questions, curiosity mixing with shock. But before anyone could press further, the young sports car owner barked, "Don't listen to fairy tales. He's just a homeless man with dirty hands. Nothing more." Yet the tremor in his voice betrayed his fear that the truth was already slipping into the open. Marcus bent down, picked up his sign once again, and held it in front of him, the simple words catching the eyes of every person standing there. "Can I fix it for food?" No arrogance, no demands, just a quiet plea, written by a man whose hands had once gripped the steering wheel of destiny. The laughter that followed was weaker this time, strained, forced, because deep down, every single person watching had begun to feel the first cracks in their certainty, and with it came the faintest whisper of guilt. And as Marcus walked away from the crowd, the sound of the running engines behind him was more than just proof of his skill. It was the heartbeat of a past the world had tried to bury, and the echo of a truth that no amount of cruel laughter could erase. Marcus sat on the curb after the crowd thinned, his stomach empty but his mind restless, the voices of laughter still echoing in his ears. yet it was the engines he had touched that pulsed louder inside him, reminding him of who he once was and what his hands still carried within them. The cardboard sign lay against his knee, but his eyes were fixed on his fingers, scarred and rough from years on the street, though beneath the dirt and cuts, they still remembered the rhythm of a racetrack, the grip of a wrench, the delicate balance between speed and survival. He flexed them slowly, almost as if testing whether they still belonged to him, and with each movement came a flood of memories, the roar of thousands in the stands, the flashing lights, the smell of burning rubber, the split-second decisions that had won him races, and the night when it had all been torn away by a crash that had broken not only his car but his career, leaving him limping into a life of silence and shadows. Yet now, after fixing 2 engines under the mocking eyes of strangers, he felt something stir, like embers refusing to die, and he realized his hands had not forgotten. They had been waiting, hidden beneath years of pain, waiting for a reason to prove themselves again. As the sun set and the streetlights flickered on, Marcus heard footsteps approach, slow and hesitant. He looked up to see the older man from the crowd, the one who had whispered his name before being silenced by the gears. The man stood there for a moment, then lowered himself onto the curb beside Marcus and said quietly, "I knew it was you, Marcus Reed. I used to watch you race. You were fire on the track." Marcus looked away, his voice low and rough. "That man is gone. All that's left is someone who fixes cars for food." But the man shook his head. "Your hands don't lie. I saw it. The way you touched those engines, it wasn't luck. It was memory. It was skill. You're still him, even if the world has forgotten." Marcus felt his chest tighten, not with pride but with the weight of all the years he had carried his fall alone. He wanted to believe the man's words, but fear clung to him, fear that if he admitted who he was, the pain of losing it all would return sharper than before. Before Marcus could answer, the roar of another car echoed down the street. A black sedan pulling up with smoke pouring from the hood. A young woman stepped out, frustration written on her face as she muttered into her phone. The older man nudged Marcus gently. "Go, show them again. Not for them, for yourself." Marcus hesitated, but something inside pushed him forward. He stood, picked up his sign, and approached the woman. "I can fix it for food," he said, his voice steady. She looked him up and down, her eyes skeptical, but the older man called out, "Trust him. He knows what he's doing." Reluctantly, she stepped aside. Marcus lifted the hood, and the smell of oil and heat rushed out. But, instead of shrinking back, he leaned in, his hands moving almost on their own. He traced wires, adjusted connections, tightened bolts in, and the entire time his mind replayed the countless pit stops where seconds had meant victory or defeat. The cafe crowd had gathered again, drawn by the sight of him working, their laughter, quieter now, their eyes filled more with curiosity than mockery. They watched as his rough hands danced with surprising grace. His focus so sharp it seemed as though he were back in the spotlight of the racetrack. Sweat dripped down his face, but his movements never faltered, each adjustment carrying the certainty of someone who had lived a lifetime inside engines. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he stepped back and said the same words as before. "Try it now." The woman slid into the car, twisted the key, and the engine roared back to life, stronger than before, its growl filling the street like a challenge to anyone who had doubted him. Gasps spread through the crowd, and for the first time, some even clapped, though hesitantly, as if unsure whether they were allowed to admire the man they had mocked. Marcus did not smile, did not bow. He only wiped his hands on his jacket and looked at them with calm eyes, though deep inside, his heart was pounding with something he had not felt in years: purpose. The young woman climbed out, her face softened. With gratitude, she reached into her purse, pulling out cash, but Marcus shook his head. "I don't want money, just a meal." She hesitated, then nodded, promising to return with food. The crowd murmured, their whispers shifting from doubt to questions, some even daring to ask, "Who is he really?" The older man stood tall, and spoke the truth that Marcus had tried to bury. "He's Marcus Reed, a legend, a man who once flew faster on wheels than anyone in this country." Silence fell over the street, heavy and charged, as dozens of eyes turned back to Marcus, disbelief and awe battling in their gazes. Marcus felt the world closing in, the weight of recognition pressing against him. But before anyone could flood him with questions, he simply lifted his sign again, the words as humble and heavy as ever, "Can I fix it for food?" And in that moment, the people who had laughed at him earlier began to feel the stirrings of shame. For they realized they had mocked not just a homeless man, but a man whose hands still remembered greatness, hands that even time itself could not erase. The moment the older man spoke Marcus Reed's name aloud, the air on the street seemed to shift, as though the noise of the city dimmed just to let the weight of those words sink in, and the crowd that had gathered, once laughing and mocking, now stood frozen in disbelief. Their phones held up not for entertainment, but to capture proof of something they did not yet fully understand. While Marcus himself felt the ground grow heavy beneath his feet because his past, the one he had buried under years of silence, had been dragged into the open. The whispers spread quickly, like ripples across water. strangers repeating his name as if testing whether it was real, some asking each other if they remembered the old magazine covers, the racing posters, the late-night broadcasts of championships, where his car had flown like lightning across the track. A teenager pulled up an image on her phone and held it beside Marcus, and the resemblance was undeniable. Though aged by hardship, the same sharp jawline, the same piercing eyes, only dulled now by hunger and sorrow. The younger ones gasped. The older ones nodded slowly, their memories unlocking pieces of a forgotten era when Marcus Reed had been untouchable. The man who raced not just with skill but with fire in his veins. The cafe patrons who had mocked him earlier shifted uncomfortably in their seats, shame creeping into their faces as they realized they had laughed at a man who once inspired millions. A man who had broken records with hands now calloused by poverty. Marcus lowered his sign, his heart pounding as if it were back in a race, and he wanted to deny it, to walk away, but the truth had already been unleashed, and the crowd pressed forward, demanding to know what had happened, why a legend now sat on a sidewalk begging for food. For a long moment, he said nothing, his eyes drifting to his hands again, because it was easier to look at them than to face their pity. But then he spoke in a low, steady voice, and the words cut through the silence. He told them about the night of the crash, how his car had spun out at full speed, slamming into the wall with a force that shattered not only his bones but his dreams, how he had fought to recover and had even returned to the track, but the sponsors who once chased him now turned their backs, saying he was too old, too broken, too risky. He told them how betrayal had followed, how people he trusted with his money drained it while he struggled to heal.